Coming up on Colonial Crossfire, Trump's healthcare debacle, the Russia investigation, and a goodbye. Joining us on the left, Tremaine Smith. On the right, Brandon Whitehill. And I'm your moderator, Andrew Desiderio. This is Colonial Crossfire. President Trump's first major legislative push ends in defeat. Welcome to Colonial Crossfire. I'm Andrew Desiderio. Republicans tried and failed to repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act this month, just 60 days into the Trump presidency. But this time it wasn't the Democrats who derailed the GOP's repeal effort. On top of this legislative defeat, the White House has been dealing with new revelations that the FBI is investigating the Trump campaign over the possibility of collusion with Russian state actors to tilt the election in his favor. Joining us to discuss all of that and more, our familiar student panel. On the left, Tremaine Smith, a graduate student from Salisbury, North Carolina, in the School of Political Management. Tremaine is the special assistant to Congressman G.K. Butterfield. On the right, Brandon Whitehill, a senior from Philadelphia, majoring in international affairs and economics. Brandon is the co-president of the GW Young Americas Foundation. Thanks to both of you for coming back.
Thanks for having us.
The House Freedom Caucus has gained a significant amount of power here in Washington over the last few years. It was arguably responsible for forcing out former House Speaker John Boehner and has effectively acted as a perpetual thorn in the side of Republican congressional leaders. This month, they won another major battle, sinking the GOP's Obamacare repeal and replace effort. The American Health Care Act had the support of the majority of House Republicans, but the Freedom Caucus wasn't convinced, and some moderates also expressed their disappointment with the final product. On top of all of that, influential conservative groups came out strongly against the bill, some even calling it Obamacare 2.0, as others have said the entire ordeal puts the rest of Trump's domestic agenda in peril. House Speaker Paul Ryan did not sugarcoat the magnitude of this loss.
Still, we got to do better, and we will. I absolutely believe that. This is a setback, no two ways about it.
So, Brandon, how significant of a setback is this for the president?
So there's no two ways about it. As Speaker Ryan said, this is a defeat for President Trump, but I hope it's a lesson in governing. I think ultimately the Freedom Caucus did President Trump a favor, despite his tweeting, his late night tweeting, that the American Health Care Act was not a popular bill among the American people, among the United States Congress. So by defeating it and hopefully in the future being able to move to something better, they saved them from what Democrats have suffered electoral losses for 7 years, which was an unpopular health care bill. But I hope that President Trump learned something about bringing in all aspects of the Republican caucus before the bill is published, not negotiating in backroom deals, and then moving forward on some of the bigger issues that he wanted to tackle.
Tremaine, I'm sure you remember when President Obama was trying to sell the Affordable Care Act to America, he basically spent a year on it. He gave a State of the Union-like address about health care. He went to a bunch of town halls around the country. Did Republicans invest enough political capital in this health care act? Do you think they should regret the speed at which this entire process played itself out?
Well, yeah, I think they should regret the speed because they tried to do it in 63 days. As you said, the president spent a year or more selling this to the American people. They did it through regular order for the most part as far as committee hearings, testimony goes. The GOP, Paul Ryan, said he wanted to do things in regular order, did not have subcommittee hearings, public testimony to the degree that regular order would stipulate. And so what they tried to do was pass it on the anniversary of Obamacare. I think it was rushed. It was a horrible bill that polled probably less than hemorrhoids. And I think, like Brandon said, this will be a lesson for President Trump. Well, the miracle would be if he could learn a lesson, but not to rush things through, that governing is a lot different than campaigning, and to really take their time to come up with something that is palatable for the majority of Americans.
But do you acknowledge that the Affordable Care Act, as it is, has pretty significant structural issues? There are rising premium issues around the country, some parts of the country where there's just one insurer to choose from. Do you acknowledge that there are these real problems with the ACA that need to be fixed?
Sure, everyone's acknowledged that, even the President Obama. And so instead of just throwing the baby out with the bathwater, let's fix these things. Trump is bent on letting it fail. He's not wanting to do anything to fix these things. And so he would rather push through a bill that 17% approval rating that kicks 24 million people off their insurance, that strips funding for Medicaid, very vulnerable citizens, and continues to show the incompetence of the White House in one hand and the inability for both chambers of Congress to work together, in this case the House.
Brandon, what about that issue of President Trump saying, or at least suggesting from the Oval Office, that he would just let Obamacare, quote unquote, implode or explode, and then be able to blame it on the Democrats? Is that responsible?
No, and I don't think he's being particularly serious. This isn't a take him literal. This is not
He's
that,
not being literal.
but this is a negotiation tactic. This is how he manages business deals when someone tells him no. Only this time it's Congress who has to pass the bill that he intends to sign. So I think they will revisit health care. There is another plan out there, the Sanford in the House, Rand Paul bill in the Senate, that no one has really considered, but it does fully repeal Obamacare. It does take measures to reduce the skyrocketing premiums and to ensure that there are multiple choices in every geographic location. So I hope they take a look at that one. But yeah.
I hope so. I want to ask you as a Republican, was it smart for President Trump to go after the Freedom Caucus in the way that he did? He's calling out specific members now on Twitter, and before that he said the Freedom Caucus essentially saved, in his words, saved Obamacare and Planned Parenthood.
Well, substantively, that first part is kind of ridiculous. If you're going to suggest that the Heritage Foundation, Club for Growth, and some of these members of the Freedom Caucus are on the same side as Planned Parenthood and Obamacare, that's just ridiculous. I don't know if it's smart or not smart. It's something he'll do. I don't think it will significantly impact him or his followers or the Freedom Caucus or their followers, but I think ultimately they will come together. If you looked at Trump's first reaction, he said, oh, it's okay that they voted against it. We don't always agree on things. And then he started to sort of magnify their part in defeating it. But
Tremaine, is Paul Ryan safe as Speaker?
Probably. I don't think. Frankly, I think that his bigger worry is the civil war in his party. Who would replace him though? Kevin McCarthy. He's not majority. He was majority leader under Boehner. He's not Speaker for a reason. Steve Scalise, who's an avowed attendee at a white supremacist event. So for the guys that are in line next, is like, who would we replace him with?
So the argument has been presented forth then that this healthcare, I guess you can call it a debacle for the Republicans, makes it more difficult for President Trump to carry out his legislative agenda going forward. The main thing going forward we'll be looking at is tax reform. Paul Ryan said that's pretty much up next on the agenda. You have border security after that. Brandon, do you worry that tax reform is going to end the same way healthcare did, with Republicans not agreeing on the approach?
So I understand Paul Ryan's approach. He brands himself as a policy guy, and in economic terms, the CBO projected that the American Health Care Act would reduce the deficit, which could then justify politically other tax cuts during tax reform. So that sort of worked. He didn't consider the political dimension, though. So that's going to be difficult going in on the heels of this defeat. I think the real sticking point with tax reform is going to be the border adjustment tax, because you're going to have a lot of Republicans against that. That's sort of the justification for making the tax cuts revenue neutral, but it's not going to fly, and it's not a smart policy either.
So Tremaine, the House Freedom Caucus is likely going to say that these tax cuts do not have to be revenue neutral, as Brandon said, which means that you're not going to try to make up the sort of the lost revenue elsewhere with either increasing taxes elsewhere or cutting spending elsewhere.
Right.
What do you think would be the right approach for Republicans to take if you were advising them?
Well, the first approach would be to sit down and work with Democrats, and that's something that they've spent the last 7 years not doing, much to the disappointment of the American people. So that would be the first thing that I hope that they would do. Also, they need to consider that a border adjustment tax, it could have negative effects on lower income individuals. You slap a 20% surtax on imported goods, retailers have to raise their prices, and so that disproportionately affects folks who shop at Target and Walmart, a lot of those folks being less well off. So
is that something you would oppose, Brandon?
The border adjustment tax? Oh, wholeheartedly, yeah.
So I want to move on real quick before we wrap this segment on the Supreme Court pick of Neil Gorsuch. It's been, I guess, put out there by some Democrats, some top Democrats, that they would filibuster this nomination. Tremaine, is that the right approach for Democrats to take?
They're still reeling from the GOP robbing President Obama of his pick of Garland, and it was wrong of them, and they ought to be ashamed of themselves. I think that it's within their prerogative to filibuster.
Are they wasting too much political capital if they do this?
Well, here's the thing, though. I don't know, because the Republicans are in, disarray themselves. I think what we're doing is not going to be that much of a detriment. They're much of a detriment to themselves. I think, though, that they have the prerogative to filibuster. And if you can't get a nominee who can get over 60 votes, like Kagan got over 60 votes, Sotomayor got over 60 votes, you don't need to change the rules of the Senate. You need to change the person being confirmed.
Brandon, I'll give you the last word on Gorsuch.
Yeah, that's pretty ridiculous. So when it comes to the Supreme Court, I don't expect Democrats to know much better than to just intuit and to just filibuster as like a knee-jerk reaction, because that's what they've been doing for 40 years.
Not give hearings
well,
like they did with
there has
Garland.
never been a Democrat-appointed Supreme Court justice that has faced a partisan filibuster. Neil Gorsuch would be the third. Democrats have not, in 40 or so years, had to replace their preferred nominee with another one. Republicans have to do that at least 7 times or so. Democrats instinctively go after Republican nominees, not on their qualifications, because Neil Gorsuch is universally recognized as being well qualified for the Supreme Court, but because they disagree with them. And so, notwithstanding...
What was their case against Garland? They didn't even give the poor man a hearing.
The Republican
We've
position
never
on
seen that in
Merrick
American
Garland was
history.
consistent from the day Mitch McConnell announced it, that they were
We've
not
never
going
seen
to
this.
allow a lame duck president
Why?
in an election
Why?
year to make a
Obstruction.
Supreme Court announcement
No.
appointment that would change the ideological balance of the Supreme Court that had existed for 40 plus
The
years.
Constitution
I
gives
think
the
that's
president
reasonable, and
prerogative.
they would have accepted Hillary Clinton's nomination. They would have had no choice. And if you really think that Merrick Garland's seat was stolen,
It was
you would
stolen.
have
It was
to
robbed.
you would have to accept this, that Republicans and the Federalist Society and the Heritage Foundation were betting on Trump winning, and no one was betting on that until election night, and that is a ridiculous claim to
I don't even
make.
look to Trump winning the presidency. I look
He
to
would-
this.
he would have
I
had
look
to if
to
this
this
was
continued
to pay off.
effort of the Republicans in Congress, Mitch McConnell, obstructing President Obama. That's what I'm looking at, and he did it with the Garland
The
nomination.
Supreme Court
and
is
that's
very
what I'm
different.
looking at.
Institutionally, the Senate treats Supreme Court nominees very differently than they treat all of the political issues,
Well,
for
I think
good
if
reason.
Gorsuch can't get 60 votes, then they need to change the nominee. not
That's
the rules of the
ridiculous, because
Senate.
that's not a
Guys,
standard that
I think
any
that's
other
what they
appointment
need
has
to
ever
do.
been
That's
held
exactly
to.
what they need to do.
That is going to have to be the last word. We'll get back to this more after the break. But first, let's go over to Mary Grace Brown for a GWTV news break. Mary Grace?
Thanks, Andrew. It looks like we are having political drama of our own on campus. The GW Joint Election Committee made a last-minute decision to postpone the Student Association elections by 1 week. They will now be held on April 5th and 6th. In a statement, the JEC said it received numerous complaints against candidates running in the election. The committee said it needs more time to investigate the allegations. The decision was made after 2 of the presidential candidates, Landy Watson and Cole Ettengoff, made allegations of misconduct against each other. No complaints, however, were filed against candidate Adam Johnson. G-Week will continue to monitor the situation and give you a recap of the Student Association election on our next episode. Earlier this week, the university named Maurice Joseph head coach of GW men's basketball. Joseph was named interim head coach back in September after the dismissal of then head coach Mike Lonergan. Joseph has now signed a 5-year deal to coach the Colonials. Joseph led the team to 20 wins this season, and he engineered a 10-8 record in the Atlantic 10, which included 5 consecutive wins to finish the regular season. Finally, spring has arrived in the district, and you can sense the excitement on campus. Coming up this weekend is Spring Fling. Sage the Gemini and Matoma will co-headline the show, and hip-hop artist Isaiah Rashad will open. Doors to the free concert open at 4 p.m. in University Yard, and the 3 musical acts will kick off at 6 p.m. Back to you, Andrew.
All right, thanks, Mary Grace. Coming up after the break, we'll turn our focus to the Russia investigation. Stay with us.
Raise high. This isn't just our battle cry. It's our call, our challenge. Because when you are called to Washington, you are called to higher expectations, to a higher standard. We are called here to advance knowledge, to serve society, to change the world. This is the George Washington University, and what we make is history. So stand up, be bold, take risks, press on, push harder, raise high.
Welcome back. The White House has been facing daily questions over the FBI's investigation into Russian efforts to meddle in the 2016 election, which we now know includes a probe of whether Trump campaign officials colluded with Russian operatives. House Intelligence Committee Chairman Devin Nunes, a Trump ally who served on the transition team, has been under fire from Democrats and some Republicans over his handling of the House's investigation. Last week, it was revealed that Nunes went to the White House to supposedly view evidence of, quote, incidental surveillance of individuals close to Trump, a revelation which Trump said vindicates his unsubstantiated claim that former President Barack Obama had Trump Tower wiretapped. The New York Times reported that 2 White House officials were responsible for providing the evidence to Nunes. The White House is neither confirming nor denying this. As Nunes and the White House faces their own questions over collusion, former Director of National Intelligence James Clapper flatly said he has seen no evidence of collusion between Trump officials and Russians during the campaign. But the top Democrat on the House Intel Committee sees it a different way.
I was surprised to see Director Clapper say that, because I don't think you can make that claim categorically as he did. I would characterize it this way at the outset of the investigation. There is circumstantial evidence of collusion. There is direct evidence, I think, of deception.
So, Tremaine, is it responsible for Schiff to declare that there has been circumstantial evidence of collusion?
I think it's responsible of him to do that. I think that it's apparent when the leaks were happening from the DNC, whose side the Russians were favoring. They were favoring, one, Trump to prop up his presidential prospects, but also to denigrate those of Hillary Clinton's. And so I think that it is responsible for him to do that. I believe Representative Schiff has high confidence that Putin did play a role in sort of hijacking, or at least involvement in our electoral process, and I think we need to get to the bottom of it.
Brandon, do you buy that explanation from Congressman Schiff?
Well, that is true what you said about what the Russian hacking was aimed at during the campaign, but that itself is not evidence, not even circumstantial evidence that there was collusion. What the House is doing right now is sort of a dual investigation that's not related to each other. One hand, they're looking at, was there collusion between Trump's campaign and Russia? On the other, they're looking at, was there any evidence of wiretapping of any Trump at Trump Tower or any Trump associates? And they're really not related. So Nunes is over at the White House looking at leaks. The Democrats are very focused on Russia, and I'm worried this is starting to get very politicized. They're calling up witnesses that confirm a narrative. They're releasing press statements that spin certain statements in their favor. Are we interested here in truth-seeking, honestly, or are we interested in just confirming our political biases?
But is Nunes too close to Trump to, as you say, seek the truth?
Potentially, yeah. I think this whole thing has turned into just a bizarre sort of debacle in the House.
I agree.
Has Nunes lost credibility?
He's lost credibility. He never had credibility, in my opinion, being so close as a member of the Trump transition team with a seemingly vested interest in the Trump transition and now the presidency. And so I think there is no room for an objective point of view from him. And as far as the wiretaps, that's just back to the Trump playbook of detract and distract. You want to distract from Sessions being under fire for his conversations with Russians during the campaign, and you want to detract from this continued stream of scandal and controversy that continues to surround the Trump administration.
Brandon, we now know, according to the New York Times, as I just said, that 2 White House officials were apparently responsible for at least providing Nunes with some sort of evidence and letting him into the White House. One was a national security official. The other one was a lawyer who works in the White House counsel's office. But Paul Ryan said in an interview last week that Nunes told him that his sources for this claim about incidental surveillance were, quote, whistleblower types. Was Paul Ryan misled?
I'm not quite sure. And I've heard also reports that it was a member of the intelligence community that gave Nunes this information. So I think there's a lot of opaqueness around this. And I think it would have been responsible for Nunes to let his committee members, Republicans and Democrat, know about what he had found out before he went to a press conference. As I said, it was bizarre behavior, and I really don't think that the House is capable, from Nunes' side and from Schiff's side, of conducting a non-politicized investigation at this point.
So since there is a sort of lack of clarity on this issue then, as you say, or opaqueness, isn't it up to the White House to sort of set the record straight and tell us what's happening?
I think Trump could help, and I think that there are Trump affiliates now who are willing to testify. We heard the recent
Well, not necessarily Trump himself or his associates
administration
from the campaign. I mean, someone like Sean Spicer going forth in front of the press and saying he can't say anything about this issue.
Well, I think all parties refrain from commenting on investigations. Now, if the House said we're going to end what we're doing, maybe throw it to the Senate, where they might have a more reasoned ability to call witnesses and do this, or there have been other proposals on how to investigate this. I don't think they should comment right now if there's an investigation open, but there are people who can testify from Trump affiliates. Paul Manafort has offered to testify. Mike Flynn recently has, and I think that would help. And I think the administration should encourage those people to do so.
Tremaine, how does the White House get past this?
Well, do they? I mean, the reason we are discussing this is because the Russians influenced our election to give Trump the advantage. He won, not all due to it, but in part, I believe. And so I believe that Nunes tarnished his credibility with his absolutely bizarre behavior. It's just bizarre. And I think there needs to be an independent investigation with a highly qualified Democrat prosecutor, highly qualified Republican prosecutor getting to the bottom of this, to the very bottom of it. If the White House had any interest whatsoever in clearing this up or working to make sure that we got to some eventuality, they would have done it by now.
Brandon, I saw you shaking your head about the
I think we should be
about tilting the election.
a little careful here, because there are still, to this day, Democrats claiming that Russians hacked our election, which is not an accurate characterization, nor did they hack any voting totals. And I think it's important to remember that what tilted the election was Hillary Clinton's failure to play to the interests of traditionally blue states that for the first time in 25 plus years flipped red.
A lot of political considerations, but also, you know, you have Kellyanne Conway saying Obama's spying out of the microwave. So there's this whole bit of ridiculous.
I hope you realize tongue in cheek.
Well, you know, I'm being Trump here, right? Don't take me literally, right? Right.
All right, so Michael Flynn is back in the news. We know that he is apparently, Tremaine's happy about that. We know that he has apparently asked for immunity in exchange for his testimony. Last year during the campaign, though, he said, quote, "When you are given immunity, that means you've probably committed a crime." Brandon.
Yeah, I would hope that we get to hear his testimony, and I hope that if he did commit a crime, that he doesn't get full immunity from that, because I would want our officials to be held responsible for what they did. However, at the same time, his involvement that we know of right now was making phone calls to Russian ambassadors saying certain things. We don't know that he passed on classified information or there was collusion. Again, there's no evidence of that. I would be interested also to know what President Obama meant when he told Vladimir Putin or that he would have more flexibility after the 2012 election. There are certain interactions that we have with foreign leaders. Medvedev. Yeah, I just thought that might be it. Yeah.
The Prime Minister.
Nonetheless, they play off one another very strongly. I would like to know what that meant. And so there are certain things that people say that I'd like to find the truth about. Ultimately, I don't think that this investigation will uncover collusion or crimes. That's just my intuition. I might be wrong. But I would be interested in what he has to say.
Tremaine, well, you the last word on this.
Yeah, Flynn, you know, at the convention yelling, "Lock her up." Now it's turned to "Don't lock me up." He was right. If you are seeking immunity, you've probably done something wrong. He's probably done something wrong. And this is not about what sort of information he passed along. Obviously, that's important. But it's the fact that he lied. He's a liar. I'll just say it. And he misled the vice president in doing so and lied in that. That's why he was the first casualty of this continued sordid and mess of an administration.
Would you say the same thing about immunity in that probably committed a crime for the people tied to Hillary Clinton?
Well, I think anytime you don't seek immunity for no reason. I think one size fits all here. There's a reason you're wanting some cover. And in this specific case with Mike Flynn, there's a reason. And I think we need to get to the bottom of it.
All right, that will be the last word. After this break, it's rapid fire. Stay with us. Welcome back. Our panel joins us again for rapid fire, some quick answers to some quick questions. French presidential candidate Marine Le Pen met with Russian President Vladimir Putin earlier this month, effectively giving his stamp of approval to rising nationalism in Europe and fueling concerns over Russia's efforts to influence other countries' elections. But the Netherlands rejected their far-right candidate, Geert Wilders, in their recent election. Tremaine, is Russia trying to weaken Europe?
That I'm not sure. I do know that it seems that they're trying to expand their influence not only in Europe but also in the Mediterranean region. And you know, this meeting between he and Le Pen is evidence of that, reaching out to more of a nationalistic perspective as opposed to global. I think is what we're looking at here. So I think he could be looking to expand his influence there.
Brandon, is this troubling?
To weaken Europe, I would say no, because he relies on economic ties with Europe and whatnot. Weaken European institutions like the European Union, NATO, absolutely, yeah. And that is troubling, although I think we can agree that Marine Le Pen is not going to be the next French president, so I'm not entirely worried about that.
Hey, that's what Tremaine and you were saying about Trump last year. So
That's true.
careful what you wish for.
Yeah.
They used the popular vote, though.
Which we need.
Police in Russia have been cracking down on anti-corruption protesters, which have numbered in the hundreds of thousands nationwide. Brandon, is Putin losing his grip on Russia?
I would say no. You still look at his approval rating, it's up there around 80%.
He's going to win re-election.
He's going to win re-election next year. So to answer your question directly, no. But does this portend problems in the future as this young protesting generation becomes the main voting bloc of the working age population? Sure. Look down the line and we might see some turbulence in Russia.
Tremaine?
I agree. I think that he's going to win. I mean, he's a strong man. He's used to getting what he wants, and he takes it by force. We see that in our current leader. But I think that it's good that these protesters are standing up to the corrupt political elites living in luxury while the majority gets shafted, which we also see here in America.
President Donald Trump signed an executive order on Tuesday that effectively rolled back Obama-era climate change initiatives. The Trump administration has justified the move, saying the climate regulations harm economic growth. Brandon, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so this was, when I was looking it up, this is the same climate rule that was stayed by the Supreme Court just before Justice Scalia passed away. So this has been on hold, as far as I know, since from over a year ago. In terms of climate regulations, I think Trump is onto something where we have to consider the economic impact of climate regulations. The Supreme Court ruled that too, just a term or two ago. But I think he should consider the unsustainability of non-renewable resources. He signed this with coal miners behind him. Coal's not clean, and coal is going to be gone in our lifetime. So I think he should expand his options.
Tremaine?
I agree. With the perpetuation of the natural gas industry, coal seems to be on its way out. And so all these folks relying on him to bring back the coal jobs, they've gotten the shaft too. I think it's dangerous because climate change is real. It is due in large part to human activity. And any regulation that defunds or strips the necessary mechanisms to stop that, or at least to address it, is dangerous.
All right, guys, and with that, we end our debate here on Colonial Crossfire. Thank you very much, Tremaine Smith and Brandon Whitehill, for joining us. When we come back, I sit down with a GW professor to discuss North Korea's aggression and South Korea's political turmoil. Don't miss it. Welcome back. On his first trip to Asia, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson declared that the U.S. is abandoning its policy of strategic patience when it comes to North Korea. He did not rule out a preemptive military strike, saying all options are on the table to counter the North's aggression and prevent a missile attack. Almost weekly, North Korea has conducted rocket and missile engine tests, stoking fears that the Kim regime may be edging closer to conducting another nuclear test. South Korea, meanwhile, has its own political turmoil. Recently ousted President Park Geun-hye was arrested on corruption charges, and the leading candidate to replace her has shown a willingness to engage more with the North. Joining us to discuss these threats is Dr. Balbina Hwang, a GW professor who specializes in Korean politics and political economy. Dr. Hwang, thank you so much for being here.
You're very welcome. I'm very happy to be here.
Do you think the U.S. would actually ever follow through on a preemptive military strike, or is this just tough talk?
Well, it is absolutely tough talk, but there unfortunately was quite a lot of misperception. Perhaps that was the Trump administration's intent all along, was to send a very strong signal. But let's be very clear. First of all, the Obama administration officials themselves said their official policy for the last 8 years in North Korea was not strategic patience. That was something that the pundits and others essentially used to describe the policy, because there was no forward movement on the diplomatic side. Now, having said that, I don't think this administration, the Trump administration, will actually fundamentally change the policy towards North Korea, which has been remarkably consistent for the last 60 years. Every single U.S. president has always had the potential for military preemptive strikes on North Korea on the table. There's not one single U.S. president that took it off, and it would be irresponsible for them to do so. So, of course, it's on the table. That does not mean that this administration is about to launch a preemptive strike on North Korea.
So then what could the U.S. realistically do to curb North Korean aggression?
Well, realistically, not much. That is the point. That is why for 8 years, the Obama administration, to its credit, did actually try a number of things. The problem is that in this dance in which you have two parties that have to act, you can't only have one party, which is the United States. So if the other party, North Korea, doesn't want to even join the dance, then there's no dance. So basically, again, it's not bad to talk about tough talk, but the reality is, practically speaking, yes, we can do a military strike, but whether it's preemptive and whether it actually gets to the heart of the nuclear issue is a fundamentally different problem, and I actually do not think that a military strike will end the nuclear weapons problem in North Korea.
Speaking of joining that dance, Moon Jae-in is, of course, the leading candidate to replace recently ousted President Park in South Korea. How do you square his willingness to sort of engage more with North Korea with what Secretary Tillerson just went to Asia and pronounced?
Well, again, I don't think those two are fundamentally, even on principle, necessarily in contrast. Unfortunately, we've been conditioned to think so because in the 2000s, you had Kim Dae-jung, the Nobel Prize winner, pursue a policy of engagement, and then President George W. Bush, who was thought to be very hardline. In the end, those two policies were not necessarily contradictory.
So I'm wondering what China's role will be in all of this. Chinese President Xi Jinping is, of course, coming to the United States. This week he's meeting at Mar-a-Lago with President Trump. Top agenda item will obviously be North Korea. What should President Trump say to President Xi?
Actually, I don't think the top agenda item will be North Korea. I think that's the point. China does not have North Korea on the top of its agenda. President Xi has many, many more things that he wants to work out with the United States in order to create an environment in which China is stable for his transition into the next term. So I think that's actually the mistake. I think we think that North Korea should be at the top of the agenda. And frankly, it isn't. And as for China's role, well, China could potentially have a greater role. But again, back to the dance analogy, China simply is saying it doesn't want to participate. It's not willing to use its role. So we can't force China to. And in fact, by the way, this would be a continuation by the Trump administration from the last two presidencies of essentially trying to outsource the problem to China. And it has not worked in 20 years.
China has said that if the THAAD missile defense program is deployed, there would be economic retaliation against South Korea. How would this affect regional relations if it were actually deployed?
Well, the deployment? Well, here's the thing. So China is already employing economic essentially weapons against South Korea. It's already retaliating. And frankly speaking, the issue is not whether or not South Korea or Japan, U.S. allies, actually deploy THAAD. THAAD is purely a defense system, which every sovereign government, including China, has the right, including North Korea, by the way, has the right to employ to provide defenses for its own country. That is what it is, and China's attempt to make it as THAAD will change the strategic balance of power is simply incorrect. China makes it that way because China doesn't want THAAD, but China does not have the right to interfere in the sovereign decisions of another country in its defense. And so, frankly speaking, I think President Trump at this summit needs to defend that principle for all countries of the world and actually come down rather hard on China about its stance.
Do you think he's going to?
It is
Anybody's guess?
unclear to me. Apparently, Secretary Tillerson at least did not do so publicly during his visit.
And finally, now that recently ousted President Park has been arrested, where do you see her corruption case going?
Well, she's been ousted. We should be quite specific here because this is an important sign of modernization and progress in South Korean democracy. She was impeached, and then it went through the court process, and the decision was constitutional, and so she is no longer president. The corruption charges will proceed, and again, I think this is an important test for how far South Korea has come in its process of institutionalizing its court system and its judicial system.
Dr. Wong, we will see what happens. Thank you so much for being here.
You're very welcome.
Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Thank you. When we come back, Mike Falco has our debate fact check.
History isn't only what's happened. History is also what's happening. At the George Washington University, we're making history every day.
We pass legislation that shapes our lives, our culture, and our future.
We live the mantra, champions in the classroom, in the community, and in competition.
Which instills in us a determination to reach new heights.
We break new ground in the treatment of patients and the study of disease.
And tackle the most important challenges in our society.
We form new relationships and grow as entrepreneurs.
And we imagine new ways to connect on a global scale.
As alumni, we make history by supporting students.
We create scholarships that make an exceptional education attainable.
We provide tools and facilities that allow new ideas to come alive.
And we enhance GW's academics by attracting world-renowned faculty.
And delivering career-launching opportunities.
I'm making history.
I'm making history.
I'm making history.
The George Washington University is making a difference. The George Washington University is making history. Join us.
Welcome back. During our panel discussion, a team of fact-checkers monitored our debate. Mike Falco is here to fill us in on what we missed. Mike?
Thanks, Andrew. Well, it looks like our panelists wanted to bring the facts for your last show. We found nothing to check from either Tremaine or Brandon. We do want to note, we checked Tremaine's statement that the American Health Care Act has a lower approval rating than hemorrhoids. That is true. According to some polls, hemorrhoids have an approval rating of 39%. The ACHA had an overall approval rating of 17%, according to one poll, and according to another, even amongst Republicans, it rated only a 37%, still lower than hemorrhoids. And that's all for the fact check. Andrew?
Wow, that's incredible. Thanks, Mike. Nearly 4 years ago, I walked into this studio for the first time as an eager freshman with an open mind and no clue what I was doing around here. In the last 4 years, I've hosted 15 episodes of Colonial Crossfire and helped produce countless others, and I've loved every second of it. But I graduate in May, and the time has come to pass the baton, and I'm happy to have here with me now at the desk Casey Decker, who will be taking over as moderator, starting with our next episode. Casey, welcome.
Thanks, Andrew. You know, I just want to say, over your 2 years here, you've led this show through crazier political times than I think any of us could have imagined, from the 2015 primaries up to the first 100 days, with intelligence and poise, and I know you've certainly grown a lot in the last 2 years, and because of you, the show has grown even more. So to celebrate your tenure, we put together a little video with some of the highlights and the lowlights of Colonial Crossfire with Andrew Desiderio.
I'm going to take you to task specifically about something you said, that 86% of NFL players supported Michael Sam's decision. I think it is important to point out that ESPN only surveyed 51 players, or roughly 3% of the league. Welcome to Colonial Crossfire. I'm Andrew Desiderio. Is Obama a lame duck, Or will he accomplish some of his remaining legislative goals during his final year in office? Welcome to Colonial Crossfire. I'm Andrew Desiderio. Cruz, Trump, Rubio, Clinton, and Sanders. 2016 is on. Washington is painted red. Welcome to Colonial Crossfire. I'm Andrew Desiderio. I didn't hear that through my ear, by the way. I heard it through somebody else's. God. Yeah, big tie knots are for guys that are like, you know, big, strong. I'm not, so I should be wearing a small tie knot.
Where's the spirit? Where's the guts? Huh?
Put some pizzazz in it, you know?
Anybody who knows anything about me knows I have none of that.
You look like a corpse.
Yeah, I had my hometown team, Villanova, going to the Final Four. Actually, I had them going to the championship game against Kentucky, but losing, but it didn't work out too well.
You were right about
for
one
me.
part of that.
Maybe if I played for the Philadelphia Eagles, I could pull it off. Fight, Eagles, fight. Score a touchdown, 1, 2, 3. Hit 'em low, hit 'em high, and watch our Eagles fly. Finally, a more lighthearted topic. The NFL playoffs are well underway, and sadly, my Philadelphia Eagles are not a part of it. Sean, who's your Super Bowl pick and why?
I don't watch football.
Vince Papale. The career 500th home run for Michael Jack Schmidt. What a dream to play for the Philadelphia Eagles. Don't stop me now! And, okay, I'm not Brian Snyder, that's fine. Alright, take one. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's a winner. Thank you, Joanne. All right.
Drop the mic.
That was great. Thank you, guys. It's really hard to put into words how this all feels. GWTV has meant so much to me these last 4 years, and it's been my honor to lead it this year as general manager and to anchor this very show. I've certainly made mistakes, learned from them, and along the way, I've had the privilege to work with people who have become some of my closest friends. What we do on air is not possible without the hard work of our production staff and our faculty advisors, so some thank yous are in order. First, our advisors Roxanne Russell, Stu Schwartz, and Jeff Slauzis. Thank you so much for everything you do to support us. I've learned more from you than I ever thought possible, and you are the reasons why I have such a passion for this. My amazing executive producers, Allison Crow and Mike Falco, who drive me insane while also keeping me sane. Thank you so much for your devotion to this show and, more importantly, your friendship. Our longtime production staffers, Lex Nuno, Benji Englander, Casey Decker, and Tiffany Hudson, thank you for the countless hours you've put into making this show what it is. And our GWTV Executive Board, my fellow graduating senior, Mary Grace Brown, who has been with me for this entire ride, and all of the incredible people who help lead this special organization. Your dedication has inspired me. Well, that's all for this episode of Colonial Crossfire. For all of us here at GWTV, I'm Andrew Desiderio. It's been my honor. For the last time, thanks for getting caught in the crossfire with us. Keep watching. Thank you, guys. Thank you. Yeah.
Good job.
Thanks. Thanks. Thanks, bro. Thanks, bro.
It's been good.
So.
Yeah.